They tried to rewrite your story behind your back, whispered lies, twisted truths, painted you as something you're not. And for a moment, it worked. Doors closed, faces changed, silence grew louder. But here's the part they never planned for. You didn't break. You didn't disappear. You didn't become what they said. Instead, you rose quietly, relentlessly. And now the same narrative they crafted is collapsing under the weight of your truth. Because when integrity outlives deception, when consistency outshines gossip, when your actions speak louder than their noise, the poison they spread doesn't destroy you, it exposes them. And now they're the ones choking on the very image they tried to bury you with. Lies don't usually arrive loudly. They creep in quietly through whispers, side conversations, half-truths dressed up as concern. One person says something small, another adds their own version, and before you know it, a completely different story is circulating with your name attached to it. You may not even realize it at first, but then you start to feel it. People treating you differently, opportunities slipping away, conversations going silent when you walk in. That's when it hits you. Your image has been tampered with. Someone, somewhere decided to rewrite who you are without your permission. And here's the hardest part. Your first instinct is to fight back, to explain yourself, to correct every lie, to chase down every person who heard something false about you and set the record straight. But the truth is, you can't outrun a lie by chasing it. Lies move fast, they multiply, they adapt. The more you try to control them, the more energy you lose. And while you're busy reacting, they're watching, hoping you break, hoping you become exactly what they claimed you were. But there's another way, a stronger way, a way that doesn't rely on noise, but on consistency. Truth doesn't shout, it shows up. It shows up in how you carry yourself when no one is clapping for you. It shows up in your discipline, your patience, your refusal to become bitter. When people expect you to lash out and you remain composed, that's truth speaking. When they expect you to fall apart and you keep building, that's truth speaking louder than any rumor ever could. Because over time, people don't just listen to what's said, they observe what's real. And consistency is something lies can't compete with. A lie might win attention for a moment, but it can't sustain itself against repeated proof of character. Every day you show up as yourself, every time you choose integrity over impulse, every moment you stay aligned with who you truly are, you're chipping away at that false image. Slowly, quietly, but powerfully, people start to notice the gap between what they heard and what they see. And that gap, that's where doubt begins to grow. Not about you, but about the lie. What's interesting is, you don't even have to defend yourself at some point. The same people who once believed the story begin to question it on their own. They replay interactions with you. They remember how you actually showed up. And suddenly the narrative doesn't make sense anymore because lies depend on distance, but truth thrives in proximity. The closer people get to the real you, the harder it becomes for them to hold on to something false. And this is where the shift happens. The weight that was once on your shoulders starts moving. You're no longer the one being questioned. The story is. The lie begins to collapse under its own contradictions. The people who spread it start getting uncomfortable, not because you confronted them, but because your consistency exposed them. You didn't have to argue. You didn't have to prove anything loudly. Your life did the talking for you. That's the power most people underestimate. They think power is in reacting quickly and defending loudly and fighting every battle head on. But real power is in control, in knowing that your truth doesn't need urgency, it needs time. Time to be seen, time to be felt, time to be undeniable. Because when something is real, it doesn't fade under pressure. It becomes clearer. Now, this doesn't mean it's easy. There will be moments where you feel misunderstood, moments where you want to scream your side of the story, moments where staying silent feels like losing. But you have to understand, silence isn't weakness when it's backed by substance. It's strategy, it's discipline, it's confidence in the long game. Because in the end, people may hear lies, but they believe patterns. And when your pattern stays solid, when your character doesn't bend to match the accusations, when your actions remain aligned no matter the pressure, that's when truth wins. Not in a dramatic, explosive moment, but in a quiet realization that spreads from person to person. Maybe we got it wrong. That realization is powerful, because once doubt enters a lie, it starts to fall apart. And once truth is recognized, it doesn't need to fight anymore. It stands on its own. So if you're in that place right now where your name has been twisted, where your image feels poisoned, understand this. You don't rebuild your reputation with words. You rebuild it with consistency, with patience, with truth that shows up every single day, even when no one is watching. Because eventually the same lies meant to bury you will run out of breath. And the truth will still be standing. Reputation isn't something you fix overnight. It's something you rebuild brick by brick, action by action, day by day. When it's been damaged, especially by things that aren't even true, it can feel like everything you worked for has been wiped out in an instant. People look at you through a different lens. There's hesitation where there used to be trust. And the natural reaction is frustration because you know who you are, but now it feels like you have to prove it all over again. The truth is you do, but not in the way most people think. You don't rebuild a reputation by explaining yourself repeatedly. You don't rebuild it by trying to convince everyone at once. And you definitely don't rebuild it by forcing people to see you differently. Reputation isn't repaired through words. It's rebuilt through actions. Consistent, visible, undeniable actions that slowly reshape how people experience you. At first, it might feel like no one is paying attention. You show up, you do the right thing, you stay disciplined, but the response is quiet, no applause, no immediate change. And that's the moment most people give up. They think, what's the point? No one sees this anyway. But that's exactly where the process begins. Because rebuilding your name isn't about quick validation, it's about long-term proof. Think about it. Whatever damaged your reputation didn't take years to spread. It moved fast. But what moves fast often lacks depth. It doesn't have a foundation, and that's why your response can't mirror it. If you try to fix everything quickly, you're just adding more noise. What you need is stability, something real that people can observe over time. So you start small. You focus on your habits, how you speak, how you treat people, how you handle pressure. You become intentional about your behavior, not because you're pretending, but because you're aligning even more strongly with who you truly are. And here's the key. You don't do it for show. You do it even when it feels like it doesn't matter, especially then. Because actions have a way of being noticed when they're repeated. Someone sees you stay calm in a situation where they expected you to react. Another notices your work ethic hasn't changed, even when things got tough. Someone else realizes you're still showing up for others, even when your own name has been questioned. These moments might seem small to you, but to others, they begin to form a new picture. And that picture starts replacing the old one. What people believe about you isn't based on a single moment, it's based on patterns. When the pattern they see now doesn't match the story they heard before, something shifts in their mind. They begin to question the narrative. They start thinking, this doesn't add up. And once that doubt begins, the power of the false image starts to weaken. But here's the part that requires patience. You won't always know when the shift is happening. Rebuilding your reputation is often invisible while it's in progress. There's no clear signal, no announcement that says, okay, people believe you again. It happens quietly, gradually, in conversations you're not part of, in opinions that change without you realizing it. That's why you can't rely on immediate feedback to stay motivated. You have to trust the process. And part of that process is letting go of the need to control how everyone sees you. Not everyone will come around. Some people will hold on to the old version of you, not because it's true, but because it's convenient for them. And that's something you have to accept. Rebuilding your reputation isn't about winning everyone back. It's about becoming so consistent in your truth that the right people see it clearly, because the right people always pay attention to actions. They notice how you move when things aren't easy. They recognize the effort, the discipline, the growth. And those are the people who will start to trust you again, not because you asked them to, but because your actions made it impossible not to. Over time, those small shifts turn into something bigger. Opportunities start opening again. Conversations feel different. The tension that once surrounded your name begins to fade. And one day, you realize something. You're no longer trying to prove yourself. You're just being yourself, and that's enough. That's when you know your reputation has been rebuilt, not because you forced it, but because you earned it back through consistency. So if you're in the middle of that process right now, don't rush it. Don't get discouraged by the silence. Keep showing up. Keep doing what's right, even when it feels unnoticed, because every action you take is a statement. Every choice you make is part of the story you're writing now, and this time it's a story no one else can rewrite. Silence is often misunderstood. People see it as weakness, as if saying nothing means you have nothing to say. They assume that if you're not defending yourself loudly, you must not have a defense at all. But what they don't understand is that silence, when chosen intentionally, isn't surrender. It's strength, it's control. It's knowing that not every battle deserves your voice and not every accusation deserves your energy. When your name is being questioned, the pressure to speak up is intense. You feel like you have to explain, to correct, to respond immediately before the narrative gets any bigger. And yes, there are moments where speaking is necessary, but there are also moments where speaking too much only feeds the chaos, because some situations aren't looking for clarity, they're looking for reaction. And reaction is exactly what gives them power. When people expect you to defend yourself emotionally, to argue, to prove your worth in a heated way, they're not really interested in the truth. They're invested in the drama. They want to see you shaken. They want confirmation that what they said got to you. And the moment you give them that reaction, even if you're right, you've stepped into their game. Silence removes you from that game. It doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're choosing where your energy goes. Instead of pouring it into arguments that go nowhere, you redirect it into your growth, your discipline, your consistency. And while others are busy talking, you're busy building. That shift is powerful. Because silence creates space for observation, space for reflection, space for truth to reveal itself without interference. When you're not constantly defending yourself, people are forced to look at your actions instead of your words. They start paying attention to how you move, how you respond, how you carry yourself under pressure. And that's where real judgment happens, not in what's said, but in what's seen. There's also a certain confidence in silence that can't be faked. When you don't feel the need to respond to every rumor, every comment, every accusation, it sends a message. You're not easily shaken. You're not controlled by outside opinions. You're grounded in who you are. And that kind of presence speaks louder than any explanation ever could. It makes people pause. It makes them wonder why you're so calm in a situation that's meant to disturb you. And that curiosity works in your favor. Because over time, silence begins to highlight the noise. The more others talk, exaggerate, or repeat themselves, the more obvious it becomes that something isn't adding up. Their words start to feel excessive, even desperate. And in contrast, your quiet consistency stands out even more. It becomes clear who is reacting and who is stable. But choosing silence isn't always easy. There will be moments where it feels like you're letting things slide, where it feels unfair that you're not correcting what's wrong. You might worry that people are believing things that aren't true. And in those moments, you have to remind yourself, silence isn't about avoidance. It's about timing and intention. It's about knowing that truth doesn't need to be forced into every conversation to exist. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response. Because it denies negativity the attention it needs to grow. It prevents situations from escalating. It keeps you focused on what actually matters. And most importantly, it protects your peace. Not everything deserves access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your voice. And here's something people often overlook. Silence doesn't mean you're doing nothing. Behind that silence, there's movement, there's progress, there's a quiet rebuilding happening that others may not see immediately. You're refining yourself, strengthening your mindset, becoming more disciplined in how you handle challenges. And when the time comes to speak, if it ever does, you won't be speaking from a place of emotion, but from a place of clarity and control. That's a different kind of power. Because words spoken in control carry weight. They're measured, intentional, and hard to dismiss. But even then, you may find that you don't need to say much at all. By that point, your actions have already done the work. Your consistency has already shifted perspectives. Your silence has already separated you from the noise. So instead of seeing silence as something passive, start seeing it as something strategic. It's not about hiding. It's about choosing when to engage, when to step back, and when to let time and truth handle what words can't. It's about understanding that your value isn't determined by how loudly you defend yourself, but by how steadily you stand in who you are. Because in a world full of noise, silence isn't empty, it's focused, it's intentional, and when used the right way, it becomes one of the strongest responses you can ever give. Growth doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Most people think growth is loud, big wins, public success, visible breakthroughs, but real growth, it's quiet. It happens in the moments no one claps for, in the days that feel repetitive, in the choices you make when no one is watching. And when your name has been dragged, when your image has been questioned, that quiet growth becomes your loudest response. Because while others are busy talking about you, you're busy becoming someone they can't ignore. At first, it feels unfair. You're dealing with the weight of what's been said while also trying to move forward. There's pressure, frustration, even doubt creeping in. You might ask yourself, why do I have to grow through something I didn't even deserve? But that question, as valid as it feels, can keep you stuck. Growth doesn't always come from fair situations. It comes from how you respond to them. And response is where everything changes. Instead of focusing on clearing your name in every room, you start focusing on improving yourself in every area. You refine your habits, you sharpen your mindset, you become more disciplined, more focused, more aware of how you move and what you stand for, not to impress anyone, not to prove a point loudly, but because you understand that your life itself is going to become the answer. That shift takes time, but it builds something powerful. Because growth creates evidence. It's not something people have to be told about. It's something they can see. The way you carry yourself becomes different. Your energy changes. Your presence feels stronger, more grounded. And even if people don't say it out loud, they notice. They notice that you didn't fall apart. They notice that you didn't become bitter. They notice that you didn't shrink to match the negativity around you. You expanded instead. And expansion makes noise without saying a word. When you grow, you outgrow the space that once tried to contain you. The same people who thought they had you figured out start realizing they don't recognize you anymore. Not because you've become fake, but because you've evolved. And that evolution challenges the narrative they believed. It creates a disconnect between the version of you they heard about and the version of you standing in front of them. That disconnect is powerful because it forces people to reconsider. They start asking themselves, if this is who they are now, were we wrong before? And that question alone begins to dismantle everything that was said about you, not because you argued against it, but because your growth made it impossible to hold on to the old story. But here's the part that matters most. You don't grow for them, you grow for yourself. If your growth is only about proving people wrong, it won't last. It'll burn out the moment you feel like you've made your point. But when your growth is rooted in who you want to become, it becomes sustainable. It becomes something that continues, regardless of who's watching or what they think. And that's when it truly becomes powerful, because it's no longer reactive, it's intentional. Growth also changes how you see things. Situations that once felt heavy start to feel like lessons. People who once upset you no longer have the same effect. You gain perspective, clarity, and control. You realize that not everything deserves your attention, and not everyone deserves access to your energy. That awareness allows you to move differently, more focused, more selective, more aligned. And that alignment shows. It shows in your decisions. It shows in your discipline. It shows in your ability to stay consistent even when things aren't easy. And over time, all of that builds into something undeniable, a version of you that doesn't need validation, doesn't need to argue, doesn't need to chase approval, because your growth has already spoken. What's interesting is, the louder your growth becomes, the quieter everything else feels. The noise that once surrounded your name starts fading. The opinions that once felt heavy start losing their weight, not because they disappeared completely, but because they no longer define anything about you. You've moved beyond them. And that's the real power of growth. It doesn't just prove people wrong, it makes their opinions irrelevant. So if you're in a place where things feel uncertain, where your name has been tested and your image has been questioned, don't focus on the noise. Focus on the work. Focus on becoming better, stronger, more aligned with who you truly are. Because every step you take in that direction is building something that no one can take away. And one day, without you having to say a single word, people will see it. They'll see the difference. They'll feel the shift. They'll recognize that whatever was said about you doesn't match the reality of who you've become. And in that moment, your growth won't just be personal, it'll be your loudest response. There's something almost inevitable about a false narrative. It can't hold itself together forever. In the beginning, it might seem strong, convincing even. People repeat it with confidence as if it's fact. It spreads quickly because it's dramatic, because it grabs attention, because it feeds curiosity. But what most people don't realize is that a lie, no matter how well crafted, has a weakness built into it. It has no foundation. And anything without a foundation will eventually collapse under its own weight. At first, you feel that weight on you, the pressure of being misunderstood, the frustration of being misrepresented. It can feel like you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you, something unfairly placed on your name. And during that time, it might seem like the narrative against you is winning. People believe it, repeat it, act on it. But what's really happening is something much quieter, something that takes time to reveal itself. Cracks are forming because every lie has to be maintained. It has to be repeated, adjusted, defended. The people who spread it have to keep the story consistent, and that's where things start to fall apart. Details don't match, versions change, contradictions appear, and while they're trying to keep the narrative alive, they're also exposing its flaws. Meanwhile, you're doing something different. You're not trying to maintain a story, you're living your truth. And truth doesn't require constant adjustment. It doesn't need to be rehearsed or protected. It stays the same no matter how many times it's observed. And that consistency becomes a silent force working in your favor. People begin to notice things they didn't before. They start picking up on the inconsistencies in what they heard. They compare it to what they actually see in you. And slowly that comparison creates doubt. At first it's small, a passing thought. That doesn't seem right. But over time, as your actions continue to stay aligned, that doubt grows stronger. And once doubt enters a false narrative, it starts to weaken. Because a lie depends on belief. The moment people stop fully believing it, even just a little, its power begins to fade. It doesn't disappear instantly, but it loses its grip. It becomes less convincing, less solid, less worth repeating, and eventually it reaches a point where it can't sustain itself anymore. That's when the collapse begins, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet unraveling. People stop talking about it as much. The confidence behind it fades. The same story that once spread so easily now feels forced, even uncomfortable, and those who were once quick to repeat it start distancing themselves from it. What's important to understand is you didn't have to destroy it. It destroyed itself. All you had to do was not become it, not react in a way that confirmed it, not let it shape your behavior or your identity. Because the moment you start acting out of frustration, anger, or desperation, you risk feeding the very thing you're trying to escape. But when you stay grounded, when you remain consistent, when you refuse to let a false narrative dictate who you are, that's when it begins to lose control over you. And control is everything. At some point, the situation flips. The focus shifts from you to the story itself. People start questioning where it came from, why it was said, what the intention was behind it. And in that shift, something powerful happens. The spotlight moves. It's no longer on you. It's on the narrative, on the people who created it, on the inconsistencies that were ignored before. And suddenly, the same energy that was once directed at you starts circling back to its source. That's the moment many don't anticipate. Because when a narrative collapses, it doesn't just disappear, it exposes. It reveals the motives, the exaggerations, the intentions behind it. And those who were responsible for spreading it are left dealing with the consequences of something they thought would never come back to them. That's what happens when something has no truth to stand on. And by that point, you've already moved forward. You're no longer stuck in the phase of trying to prove yourself. You're not carrying the same weight. You've grown, evolved, strengthened. The situation that once felt overwhelming now feels like something you've outlived. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defines anything about you. That's the real victory. Not that the narrative collapsed, but that you didn't collapse with it. Because it's easy to lose yourself when your name is under pressure. It's easy to start doubting who you are, to question your worth, to react in ways that don't align with you. But when you resist that, when you stay rooted in your truth, you come out stronger on the other side. And in the end, that's what people remember. Not the noise, not the rumors, not the temporary story that was built around you. They remember who you actually were, how you handled things, how you carried yourself, how you stayed consistent even when it would have been easier not to. So if it feels like something false is surrounding your name right now, understand this. It doesn't have the power to last. It might be loud for a moment. It might feel heavy for a while. But if it's not built on truth, it won't stand forever. And when it finally falls apart, you won't need to say anything because your life will already have said everything for you.